The warning lights turned red across every screen on Kelvarn Station. Commander Danny Vance stood at the main window of the control room, his hands gripped tight behind his back. Outside, in the black emptiness of space, enemy ships were appearing one after another. First 10, then 20, then more than he could count. The Vreth had found them. Kelvarn Station was a small research outpost built on the edge of known space. It floated near a dying star, far from Earth and far from help. 312 people lived here. Most of them were scientists and their families. They had come to study the strange energy readings from the nearby pulsar. They were not soldiers. They were not prepared for war. Lieutenant Katie Morris ran her fingers across her control panel, her face growing more worried with each passing second. She was young, only 26 years old, but she was the best communications officer Danny had ever worked with. Right now, she looked scared. "Commander," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "I am counting 187 ships. No, wait. More are coming. 200 now. They have formed a complete circle around us." Danny felt his stomach drop. 200 warships against one small station with no weapons worth mentioning. The math was simple and terrible. "Can't we send a message to Earth Command?" he asked. Katie shook her head. "They are jamming everything. I cannot get any signal out. We are completely alone." The Vreth Dominion was one of the most feared powers in the galaxy. They were a race of tall reptile creatures with thick scales like armor and forearms that ended in claws sharp, enough to cut through steel. They did not make treaties. They did not take prisoners. Every human colony they had attacked in the last 10 years had been destroyed completely. No survivors. No mercy. Danny turned to look at his crew. There were only 8 people in the control room, and beyond them, 40 soldiers spread across the station. 40 soldiers against thousands of Vreth warriors. Dr. Linda Marsh entered the control room. She was the head scientist on the station, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. Those eyes were filled with fear now. "Commander Vance," she said quietly, walking up to stand beside him. "What is happening? The people are scared. They are asking questions I cannot answer." Danny took a deep breath. He had to be honest with her. She deserved that much. "The Vreth have surrounded us," he said. "We cannot call for help. We cannot run. All we can do is hold on and hope that someone notices we have gone silent." Linda's face went pale. "How long can we hold?" Before Danny could answer, Katie spoke up from her station. "If they attack at full power, our shields will fail in about 18 hours. Maybe less. 18 hours. That was all the time they had left. Linda grabbed Danny's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "There are children on this station, Commander. 43 children. The youngest is only 4 years old. Her name is Emma Price. Her parents are botanists. They came here because they thought it would be a safe place to raise a family." Danny knew about Emma. He knew about all of them. He had made it his job to learn every name and every face on the station. That was what a good commander did. He remembered the people he was supposed to protect. "We will do everything we can," Danny said. "I promise you that." The first attack came 3 hours later. The station shook like it had been hit by a giant fist. Alarms screamed through every corridor. People ran in all directions, some toward the emergency shelters, others toward their battle stations. Danny grabbed a rifle from the weapons locker and headed toward the outer sections. If the Vreth breached the hull, that was where they would come through. First Sergeant Pete Hansen met him at the junction of Corridor 7. Pete was a big man with a shaved head and arms covered in old scars. He had been fighting the Vreth for 15 years, and he was still alive. That said something about his skills. "They are hitting us hard on decks 4 through 8, Pete reported. "Shields are holding, but they will not last forever. I think they are testing us, looking for weak spots. Danny nodded. Pull everyone back to the intersections. We cannot defend the whole station. We need to create choke points where we can slow them down. Understood, Commander. The hours passed slowly, each one filled with explosions and fear. The Wrath did not rush. They were patient hunters. They hit the station again and again, wearing down the shields bit by bit. In the main shelter, the civilians huddled together. Mothers held their children close. Scientists who had never touched a weapon in their lives now carried pistols, their hands shaking but their eyes determined. Linda Marsh moved among them, offering comfort where she could. She helped bandage a wounded technician. She read stories to the younger children to keep them calm. She did not show her own fear, though Danny knew she must feel it. At the 14th hour, the shields finally failed on Deck 6. The Wrath came pouring through the breach like a flood of scales and claws. Danny and his soldiers met them with gunfire and grenades. The corridor became a nightmare of smoke and screaming and death. Private Amy Sullivan was the first to fall. She was 22 years old, fresh out of training, but she fought like a veteran. When her gun ran empty, she pulled out her knife and charged at the enemy. She killed 3 of them before they brought her down. Danny saw her fall and felt something break inside him. But there was no time to mourn. There was only time to fight. Fall back, he ordered. Fall back to Section 9. They retreated step by step, leaving their dead behind. By the time they reached the intersections, only 28 soldiers remained. Katie found Danny in the corridor, her face covered in dust and sweat. Commander, I managed to send something before they fully blocked us. Just a short burst. Our coordinates and a distress code. I do not know if anyone received it. Danny looked at her, feeling a tiny spark of hope in his chest. You did good, Katie. You did really good. But even as he said the words, he knew the truth. Kelvarn Station was 3 weeks from the nearest Earth fleet. Even if someone had received the message, they could never arrive in time. All Danny could do was keep fighting and pray for a miracle. The station shook again as another wave of plasma fire slammed into the outer hull. Danny Vance pressed his back against the cold metal wall and reloaded his rifle. His hands were steady even though his heart was racing. Beside him, Sergeant Pete Hansen checked the ammunition counter on his weapon. The number was getting lower with every hour that passed. We have maybe 6 hours of supplies left, Pete said grimly. After that, we will be throwing rocks at them. Danny wiped the sweat from his forehead. They had been fighting for 20 hours now. 20 hours of constant battle, of watching good people die, of retreating again and again as the Wrath pushed deeper into the station. Then we make every shot count, Danny replied. The Wrath were unlike any enemy humanity had ever faced. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick green scales that could stop small arms fire. Their forearms let them carry multiple weapons at once, and their claws could tear through body armor like paper. But the worst thing about them was their patience. They did not rush. They did not make mistakes. They simply kept coming, wave after wave, until there was nothing left to fight. A sound echoed through the corridor. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps. Many of them. Here they come, Pete whispered. The first Wrath appeared around the corner, its yellow eyes scanning for targets. Danny shot it through the head before it could raise its weapon. 2 more appeared behind it, and Pete cut them down with a burst of automatic fire, but more kept coming. Always more. Danny and his team fell back through the corridors, fighting every step of the way. They used every trick they knew. They set traps and ambushed. They collapsed sections of ceiling on top of the enemy. They fought with guns and knives and bare hands when nothing else was left. Private Nicole Grant became a hero that day. She was only 24, a skinny girl from a small town who had joined the military to pay for college. No one had expected much from her. But when the Vreth broke through on Deck 3, she stood alone at the junction point and held them off for 15 minutes while the civilians escaped. When Danny finally reached her position, he found her sitting against the wall, bleeding from a dozen wounds. Around her lay the bodies of 17 Vreth warriors. Did they get away? She asked weakly. The families? Danny knelt beside her and took her hand. They got away. You saved them, Nicole. All of them. She smiled, blood on her lips. Good. That is good. She died a few minutes later, still holding Danny's hand. By the 30th hour, the humans had been pushed back to the central hub. This was the heart of the station, a large circular area that connected all the main sections. 300 people were crammed into spaces designed for 50. The air was hot and thick with fear. Katie Morris had set up her equipment in one corner, still trying to find a way through the Vreth jamming. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, but her face showed no hope. It is no use, she said when Danny approached. They are blocking everything. We are invisible to the rest of the galaxy. Danny looked around at the frightened faces. He saw children crying in their mother's arms. He saw old men and women who had spent their lives in peaceful research, now facing a violent end. He saw his soldiers, exhausted and wounded, still standing at their posts because they had nowhere else to go. Dr. Linda Marsh pushed through the crowd toward him. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and there was a cut on her cheek, but her eyes burned with determination. Commander, she said, the reactor is failing. The Vreth bombardment damaged the containment systems. We have maybe 4 hours before it goes critical. 4 hours. That was even less time than Danny had expected. Can we fix it? He asked. Linda shook her head. Not without getting to the engineering section. And the Vreth controlled that area now. So this was it. This was how it would end. They would either be killed by the Vreth or blown up by their own reactor. Neither option was pleasant. A voice crackled through the station speakers. It was deep and rough, speaking in heavily accented English. The Vreth had learned human language long ago, the better to terrorize their victims. Humans of Kelvon Station, the voice said. This is Commander Krathvalum of the Dominion Fleet. Your situation is hopeless. Your weapons are nearly empty. Your shields are gone. Your reactor will soon explode. You have fought bravely, but the fight is over. Danny clenched his fists as the alien continued. Surrender now, and we will grant you quick deaths. Continue to resist, and we will take our time with you. We will make you watch as we kill your children first. We will make you beg for the end. The message cut off, leaving only silence. Everyone in the hub was looking at Danny now, waiting for him to say something, waiting for him to give them hope or tell them to surrender. Danny picked up a communication device and opened a channel to the Vreth fleet. His voice was calm and steady when he spoke. Commander Krathvalum? This is Commander Danny Vance of Kelvon Station. I have heard your offer, and I have an answer for you. He paused, looking around at his people, at the soldiers who had fought so hard, at the civilians who had refused to give up, at the children who still believed in heroes. Come and take us, Danny said. If you can. He dropped the communicator and turned to face his troops. We hold until we cannot hold anymore, he said. We fight until there is nothing left to fight with. And we do not surrender. Not today. Not ever. Because we are human, and humans do not quit. A ragged cheer went up from the survivors. It was not loud. They were too tired for loud. But it was real. It was defiant. It was human. Pete Hansen slapped a fresh magazine into his rifle. You heard the commander. Let us show these lizards what we are made of. The final battle for Kelvon Station had begun. The Resolute tore back into normal space like a fist punching through a wall. One moment, there was empty darkness. The next moment, A 2-kilometer warship appeared right in the center of the Vreth armada. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. The Vreth were too shocked to react. Their sensors screamed warnings at them, but their minds could not accept what they were seeing. A human ship, here. Impossible. Captain Marcus Webb did not waste those precious seconds. Launch the Helldivers, he commanded. All batteries open fire. Give them cover. The Resolute's weapons came alive with terrible fury. Missiles shrieked toward the nearest Vreth ships. Energy cannons carved burning lines through enemy hulls. The space around the carrier became a storm of fire and destruction. And in that storm, 144 drop pods fell toward Calvern Station. Inside his pod, Major Chris Parker felt the vibrations of the launch system throwing him toward the station. The walls around him were shaking. Warning lights flashed red. The heat of atmospheric friction, or what passed for it in the station's artificial gravity field, made the metal glow. Through a tiny window, he could see the other pods falling alongside him. 143 of his brothers and sisters, each one ready to die for the people they had come to save. The Vreth finally started shooting at the pods. Energy beams flashed through space. Several pods exploded, their occupants dead before they even reached the battle. But most of them made it through. The Helldivers had trained for this. They knew how to fall through fire. Chris's pod hit the station's hull with a crash that would have killed an ordinary human. The impact system absorbed most of the force, but he still felt like someone had punched him in every part of his body at once. Before the pain could register, his training took over. He kicked open the pod door and stepped into chaos. The corridor around him was filled with smoke and screaming alarms. Vreth warriors were everywhere, their yellow eyes wide with surprise at this impossible attack. Chris raised his rifle and started shooting before his feet had fully touched the ground. The first 3 Vreth died without knowing what hit them. The 4th managed to raise its weapon, but Chris was faster. His enhanced reflexes made him move like lightning. He put 2 shots through the creature's skull and kept walking. All around the station, similar scenes were playing out. Helldivers burst from their pods and immediately went to work. They moved through the corridors like death itself, cutting down everything in their path. Corporal Rita Sanders led her squad through Deck 7, where the fighting was heaviest. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but in her armor she was a giant. Her twin plasma blades hummed with deadly energy as she carved through a group of Vreth who had been preparing to execute human prisoners. "Move, move, move," she shouted to the terrified civilians. "Get to the central hub. We will cover you." Sergeant Victor Cole took up position at a corridor junction and set up his heavy repeater gun. The weapon was too big for a normal soldier to carry, but Victor's cybernetic arms handled it like a toy. When the Vreth tried to send reinforcements, they ran straight into a wall of fire that turned the hallway into a slaughterhouse. "Come on," Victor laughed as he mowed down row after row of enemies. "Is that all you have? My grandmother hits harder than you." Deep in the station, Commander Danny Vance was preparing for what he thought would be his final stand. The Vreth had pushed his people back to the last defensible position. They had maybe 20 minutes of ammunition left, and the reactor was getting closer to melt down every second. Then a drop pod punched through the ceiling right in front of him. Danny raised his rifle, ready to shoot whatever came out. Friend or enemy, he was past caring. He just wanted to keep fighting until his body gave out. The pod cracked open. Inside stood a figure in black armor, 7 feet tall and covered in weapons. Blue light glowed from the visor. When the figure spoke, Danny felt his knees go weak. "Commander Vance?" "Major Chris Parker, 101st Orbital Drop Shock Troops. We are here to get you out." Danny stared at him. His brain could not process what he was seeing. "How?" he managed to say. "We thought. We sent the signal 2 days ago. You should not be here for weeks. Chris stepped out of the pod and checked his surroundings. Long story. Short version. We found a shortcut. Now, where are your civilians? 3 decks up. In the main shelter. But there are hundreds of wreaths between here and there. Chris nodded as if this was a minor inconvenience. Then we go through them. He raised his hand to his helmet and spoke into his communication system. All units, this is Parker. Primary objective located. Converge on my position. We are punching through to the civilian shelter. Responses came back from across the station. Helldivers reporting their positions, their kill counts, their status. In less than an hour, they had already cleared half the station. But the Vreth were adapting. They were calling in more troops from their ships. The numbers were turning against the humans again. Chris looked at Danny. Commander, I need you and your people to fall back to the extraction point. My soldiers will handle the enemy. Fall back? Danny shook his head. We have been fighting for 2 days. We are not leaving now. Not when we finally have a chance. For a moment, Chris studied him through his visor. Then he laughed. I heard Kelvarn was a science station. Looks like your scientists have teeth. All right, Commander. You want to fight? Stay behind me and shoot anything with scales. Together, they moved out into the corridor. Behind them came the survivors of Danny's original force, maybe 15 soldiers still standing. They were exhausted, wounded, running on nothing but willpower. But they kept going. The next hour was the most intense combat Danny had ever experienced. The Helldivers were like nothing he had ever seen. They moved faster than should be possible. They hit harder than seemed real. They took wounds that would have killed normal soldiers and kept fighting as if nothing had happened. Chris Parker was the most terrifying of all. Danny watched him fight 3 Vreth warriors at once, killing all 3 in under 10 seconds. He saw the Major take a plasma blast to the chest, stagger for a moment, then charge right back into the enemy line. When they finally reached the civilian shelter, Danny felt tears running down his face. Not from sadness, from relief, from hope. The doors opened, and 300 frightened faces looked out at their rescuers. Everyone, Chris announced, his voice carrying through the shelter. We are leaving. Stay together, move fast, and do not stop for anything. We will protect you. Little Emma Price, the 4-year-old daughter of the botanists, looked up at Chris with wide eyes. She was not scared of him. Children rarely were. Are you a superhero? She asked. Chris knelt down to her level. No, sweetheart. I am just a soldier, but today I am your soldier. And I promise you, nothing is going to hurt you. He picked her up with one arm and nodded to his troops. Helldivers, let us go home. 18 light years away from Kelvarn Station, the Earth carrier Resolute drifted through the quiet darkness of space. It was a massive ship, nearly 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons and carrying over 3,000 crew members. But right now, it was on a routine patrol, far from any active combat zone. Captain Marcus Webb sat in his command chair on the bridge, reading through reports that were mostly boring. Supply requests, maintenance schedules, personnel transfers, the usual paperwork of military life. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with gray hair cut short and a face that showed the marks of 30 years of service. He had fought in 3 major wars and survived wounds that should have killed him twice. But lately, his biggest battles were against boredom. That changed in an instant. Lieutenant Tony Reyes burst onto the bridge, nearly tripping over his own feet in his hurry. He was the communications officer, a young man who usually kept his emotions under control. Right now, he looked like he had seen a ghost. Captain, Tony said breathlessly, we have intercepted a distress signal. It is from Kelvarn Station. Marcus sat up straight. Kelvarn was a civilian research outpost. What kind of trouble could they be in? Put it through, he ordered. The signal was weak and broken, but the message was clear enough. Coordinates, a distress code, and 3 words that made Marcus's blood run cold. Wrath, siege, surrounded. How far? Marcus asked, already knowing the answer would be bad. 18 light years, sir. At standard speed, 3 weeks minimum. 3 weeks. Kelvin would be gone in 3 days at most. Everyone on that station, 300 civilians, families, children, would be dead long before any help could arrive. Unless Marcus pressed a button on his chair. Major Chris Parker to the bridge. Immediately. Chris Parker arrived 5 minutes later. He was a big man, nearly 2 meters tall, with shoulders like a bull and hands that could crush steel. But there was nothing brutish about him. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, constantly scanning his surroundings. Always alert. Chris was the commander of the 101st Orbital Drop Shock Troops. They were the most elite soldiers humanity had ever produced. Each one had been selected from the best fighters in the Earth military. Each one had been enhanced with genetic modifications and cybernetic implants that made them faster, stronger, and tougher than any normal human. They called themselves the Helldivers. Major, Marcus said, we have a situation. He explained quickly. Kelvin Station. 300 civilians. Wrath Armada. 18 light years away. Chris listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, the Major asked only one question. The new drives. Are they ready? Marcus hesitated. He knew what Chris was asking about. The Resolute carried experimental technology that almost no one in the galaxy knew existed. Fold space drives. Engines that could bend space itself, allowing a ship to travel impossible distances in mere hours instead of weeks. The drives have been developed in secret over the past 5 years. They were humanity's greatest technological achievement, and they had never been tested in real combat conditions. Theoretically, yes, Marcus said, but we do not know what will happen. The drives could fail. They could explode. They could tear the ship apart. And if we do not use them, then everyone on Kelvin Station dies. Chris nodded slowly. His face showed no fear, only calm determination. Then we use them. How soon can we jump? Marcus turned to his navigation officer. Lieutenant, calculate a fold space route to Kelvin Station. Fast as possible. The lieutenant's fingers raced across her console. 6 hours, sir. We can be there in 6 hours. 6 hours. From 3 weeks to 6 hours. It seemed impossible. But then again, humanity had made a career out of doing the impossible. Do it, Marcus ordered. All hands, prepare for fold space jump. This is not a drill. The Resolute came alive with activity. Crew members rushed to their stations. Engineers ran final checks on the experimental drives. In the lower decks, the Helldivers began preparing for war. Chris returned to the drop bay where his soldiers were waiting. 144 men and women, each one a weapon in human form. They stood at attention as their commander entered, their faces hidden behind the visors of their black armor. Listen up, Chris said, his voice carrying through the bay. We have a mission. Kelvin Station is under siege by a Wrath fleet. 300 civilians are trapped there, including families and children. They've been fighting for more than a day, with no hope of rescue. He paused, looking at each of his soldiers in turn. We are going to change that. In 6 hours, we will drop right into the middle of that enemy fleet, and we will tear them apart. We will get our people out. Every single one of them. Corporal Rita Sanders raised her hand. She was one of the youngest Helldivers, but also one of the best shots in the unit. How many Wrath are we looking at, sir? 200 ships. Probably 10,000 warriors on the station by now. A murmur went through the assembled soldiers. 10,000 against 144. Those were terrible odds. but Chris just smiled. "I know what you are thinking," he said. "You are thinking the Vreth have us outnumbered. You are thinking this might be a suicide mission. And maybe you are right." He stepped forward, his armored boots heavy on the metal floor. "But I want you to remember something. We are not ordinary soldiers. We are Helldivers. We have trained harder than any fighters in human history. We have weapons that can burn through Vreth armor like paper. And we have something the Vreth will never understand." He raised his fist. "We have each other. We fight for the person next to us. We fight for the people who cannot fight for themselves. We fight because that is what humans do. We protect our own." The soldiers responded with a roar that shook the walls. 2 hours later, the Resolute activated its fold space drives. Reality twisted and bent around the ship. Stars stretched into lines of light. And then, in a flash that could be seen for light years, the carrier vanished. 6 hours. That was all the time Kelvarn Station had to hold on, but help was finally coming. The march to the extraction point was a nightmare of fire and blood. Vreth warriors attacked from every direction, desperate to stop the humans from escaping. But the Helldivers formed a wall of steel around the civilians and refused to break. Major Chris Parker led from the front, his rifle never stopping. Every time a Vreth appeared, it died before it could take 2 steps. Behind him, his soldiers fought with the same impossible skill, the same unstoppable determination, but the enemy had numbers. So many numbers. Private Jake Monroe went down on deck 4, taking a plasma blast meant for a pregnant woman he was shielding. Corporal Rita Sanders lost her left arm to a Vreth blade, but kept fighting with her right, her face pale from blood loss, but her eyes still burning with fury. Sergeant Victor Cole ran out of ammunition for his heavy gun and used the weapon itself as a club, smashing through enemy skulls until the barrel bent from the impacts. Commander Danny Vance stayed in the middle of the formation, helping to guide the civilians through the chaos. Katie Morris walked beside him, supporting Dr. Linda Marsh, who had taken a wound to her leg. "How much farther?" Katie asked, her voice strained. "2 more sections," Danny replied. "We are almost there." A roar echoed through the corridor. A deep, terrible sound that made everyone freeze for just a moment. Commander Krathvalum had arrived. The Vreth leader was even bigger than his warriors, nearly 9 feet tall, with scales as black as space itself. He carried a massive blade in each of his 4 hands, and his eyes glowed with hatred. "Human filth," he snarled. "You think you can run from us? You think your metal soldiers can save you? I will feast on your children while you watch." Chris Parker stepped forward. "Everyone keep moving. I will handle this." Danny grabbed his arm. "Major, that thing will kill you." Chris looked back at him through his blue visor. "Maybe, but while I am fighting it, you will be getting to safety. That is what matters." He pushed Danny toward the group and turned to face Krathvalum. The 2 warriors circled each other slowly. Around them, the battle continued, but it felt distant now. This was the moment that would decide everything. Krathvalum struck first. His 4 blades came down like a storm of steel, each one fast enough to cut through armor. Chris dodged 2 of them and blocked the other 2 with his own weapon. The impact drove him back 3 steps. "You are fast for a human," Krathvalum admitted, "but you cannot defeat me. I have killed 1,000 of your kind." Chris did not waste breath on words. He attacked. The fight lasted 47 seconds. To those watching, it seemed like an eternity. The 2 combatants moved so fast they were almost blurs, trading blows that would have shattered ordinary bodies. Chris took wounds. A slash across his chest, a stab through his shoulder, a cut along his thigh. But he did not stop. He did not stop. Too many people were counting on him. In the end, he found his opening. Krathvalum overextended on a thrust, leaving his neck exposed for just a fraction of a second. Chris drove his combat knife up through the Vreth commander's throat and into his brain. The alien fell with a crash that shook the floor. His yellow eyes went dark. Chris stood over the body for a moment, swaying on his feet. Then he raised his hand to his helmet and broadcast a message on all frequencies. This is Major Chris Parker of the Earth Defense Force to all Vreth vessels. Your commander is dead. Kelvern Station is under human protection. You have one chance to withdraw. Take it. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The Vreth ships hung in space, their weapons still pointed at the station. Then, one by one, they began to turn away. Their engines fired. They retreated into the darkness. Danny Vance watched them go and felt something he had not felt in days. Hope. The evacuation took another 2 hours. Shuttles flew back and forth between the station and the Resolute, carrying survivors to safety. Medical teams worked around the clock, treating the wounded and preparing for the long journey home. When the last shuttle lifted off, Kelvern Station was empty. Its reactor finally gave out an hour later, the explosion bright enough to be seen from light years away. Chris Parker sat in the Resolute's medical bay, surrounded by his wounded soldiers. 43 Helldivers had died in the battle. 20 more were badly hurt. He had started with 144. He was ending with 80-1. Danny Vance found him there. Major, Danny said, I wanted to thank you. Without you, we would all be dead. Chris looked up at him. His face was pale, and blood was still leaking from his wounds despite the bandages. But his eyes were clear. How many civilians made it? All of them. 312. Not a single one lost. Chris closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Then it was worth it. Little Emma Price appeared in the doorway of the medical bay, clutching a piece of paper in her hands. Her mother tried to hold her back, but she pulled free and ran to Chris's side. I made this for you, she said, holding out the paper. It was a drawing, done in colored pencil. It showed a tall figure in black armor standing between a little girl and a monster. The figure was holding a sword in one hand and a heart in the other. That is you, Emma explained, pointing at the armored figure. You are protecting me from the bad guys. Chris took the drawing carefully, as if it were made of gold. Thank you, Emma. I will keep this forever. My mommy says you are a hero. Chris looked at the little girl, then at the wounded soldiers around him, then at the drawing in his hands. No, he said softly. The heroes are the people who held this station for 2 days when they had no hope. The heroes are the ones who refused to give up even when everything was against them. I am just a soldier who showed up at the end. He ruffled her hair gently. But I promise you this, Emma. Whenever you are in trouble, wherever you are in the galaxy, someone will come for you. That is what humans do. We protect each other, always. The Resolute began its long journey back to Earth. Behind it, the stars stretched into infinity, cold and dark and uncaring. But in that ship, 300 civilians slept safely for the first time in days. In that ship, soldiers who had given everything could finally rest. In that ship, humanity had proven once again what it was capable of. Captain Marcus Webb stood on the bridge, looking out at the endless void. What happens now? His first officer asked. Marcus thought about the question. The whole galaxy knew about the fold space drives now. The Vreth would tell everyone. The balance of power had shifted in an instant. Now, Marcus said slowly, the galaxy learns the truth about us. They learn that no matter how far they run, we can reach them. They learn that when they threaten our people, we respond with everything we have. He turned away from the window. They learned that humans do not leave anyone behind. The war with the Vreth Dominion ended 18 months later. The Battle of Kelvern Station became famous across the galaxy. Songs were written about it. Children learned about it in school. Military academies studied every moment of the fight. Commander Danny Vance retired and spent the rest of his life helping to protect other colonies from similar attacks. Katie Morris became a captain and led her own ship into a dozen more battles. Dr. Linda Marsh won awards for her research and always kept a picture of the Helldivers on her desk. Chris Parker never fully recovered from his wounds. The damage was too severe, even for his enhanced body. He spent his remaining years training new Helldivers, passing on everything he had learned. When he died at 67, his funeral was attended by thousands. Among them was Dr. Emma Price. No longer a little girl but a grown woman with children of her own. She gave the speech that everyone remembered. "He told me once that he was not a hero," she said, looking out at the crowd. "He was wrong. He was the greatest hero I ever knew, because he taught me the most important lesson any human can learn." She paused, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "When we are trapped and surrounded, we do not give up. When darkness closes in, we strike back. And when someone needs us, no matter how far away they are, no matter how impossible it seems, we find a way to reach them." She looked up at the stars, visible through the dome above. That is what it means to be human. And as long as we remember that, we will never truly be defeated. The crowd stood in silence for a long moment. Then, one by one, they began to applaud. It was not a loud sound, but it carried across the stars, and somewhere in the depths of space, the galaxy listened and remembered.